Good morning,
good afternoon,
and good evening.
depending on where you are in the world.
We are Margarita and Paulina, students of Marcelino Champagnat.
We live in contemporary time and we are time travelers.
This time we are going to travel to the Renaissance, and when we return, we will tell you about the experience.
This period started in the 14th century and ended up in the 17th century in northern Italy. One of the most important cities was Florence, the center of art, Siena, Milan, Venice, and Rome, and then it spread for the rest of Europe. Okay, but what was Renaissance?
Renaissance was a rebirth of Roman and Greek ideas and inventions for the fall of Constantinople. People focused in art, science, and poetry, and they also started to study the human anatomy and to have interest in men. Also, the invention of printing press as fundamental to spread Renaissance culture.
Another very important fact is that they began to question the role of church that was the most powerful institution at that time.
Humanism was also present, where the focus was the individualism and individual disciplines such as poetry, literature, and history. Humanism concentrated in secular subjects, not religious.
If we have to think about the reasons why this happened in Italy, we got three purposes. The first one, geography. Italy was the home of ancient Rome. It was in the middle of Eastern and Western Europe. It was very important to spread ideas because it had access to Adriatic and Mediterranean seas in order to commerce spices, silk, and perfumes with Asia.
The second reason is the economy. A new wealthy social class that started to spend money on art and architecture. The country preferred living in a city and not as a rural country because they had a trade and a commerce spirit. It is important to note that after the bubonic plague, many people died and only few lucky ones survived.
And finally, the political system. They didn't have a centralized government. They had city-states that act individually and each one produced goods.
To learn a little more about this artistic movement, we should know that the Roman Catholic Church was the patron saint of Renaissance in Italy. They funded a lot of churches and commissioned paintings, statues, and decorations.
Artists used techniques like frescoes, effumato, perfect proportion of human body, perspective, 3D, among others. And society, it was organized as the same as it is today? Okay, we can say it wasn't. It was divided by social classes according to their role in society. At the highest, we have nobility. Dukes and princes, they had titles of nobility and they controlled the government.
In the pyramid after were the wealthy merchants and artisans who lived in luxury houses and elaborated palaces. Then they became patrons who made portraits and architects for the houses. And after the skilled workers like carpenters, shoemakers, armor makers, and bakers that they lived in smaller houses.
At the bottom were the peasants and unskilled workers. They worked the land and produced food for the society. They lived in the countryside and poor areas. They didn't have political rights.
Women were assigned housework. In the upper classes, they didn't receive pay either. They managed the houses. In the country, women worked with children. That, like women, they didn't receive education. For the rich boys, they had tutors and were educated by the church and learned writing, reading, and music.
The marriage was a wealthy alliance that was arranged with their similar family social classes. and women also couldn't vote or inherit property.
As we mentioned at the beginning of this video, Florence was one of the most important cities, was the center of international business, and they invented a gold called florin. Also, the most important families lived there, the Medicis. By the 15th century, they dominate the political life there and opened art schools and supported science, architecture, and music.
They were powerful patrons, bankers, and rich merchants. Among the members of the family, we can highlight Giovanni, who founded the first bank, then Cosimo, who started the family dynasty and made the fortune, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who created an art school in his court, and finally Giovanni, who was the first of 4 popes.
Okay, but do you think we remember one of the best artists of the time? Filippo Brunelleschi was one of the best artists and architects in his time and also born in Florence. He and his friend Donatello went to Rome to study rings, but before that he had entered a competition to make the bronze doors of the cathedral baptistry, but finally he had lost to chivalry.
Brunelleschi's first architectural commission was to build an orphan hospital for the children who had been left without their parents after the bubonic plague. This was called Ospedale degli Innocenti. The most famous architectural feature was the dome at the top of the cathedral in Florence. Many people had tried to build it, but they failed.